but that's not really where the business is. All of these AI tools that we see out in the market are ultimately feeding into the same foundational models.
Now, if you think of on a scale of an AI or a large language model, if you put bad data in, it's multiplied.
Adoption is key for business. Enablement is key, and the realization of that. And that goes for any tech. So it doesn't just work for artificial intelligence.
What do people want to achieve from these kind of user interfaces? And do we even need half the user interfaces anymore if agentic AI is going to go out and find everything for us?
About the human in the loop, I think I like it, but it's just like, again, you were saying.
Which kind of use cases are you more willing to take that risk on versus ones where you absolutely want to keep the human in the loop?
And what are you saying that eventually that human in the loop will be, eliminated? There won't be that hand up.
And I predict the human in the loop will exist forever because there'll just be certain processes and things we do that will always want the human check and balance.
Welcome. We're just going to wait for everybody to slowly make their way into the webinar before we start, but welcome. The idea of the webinar is just to have that kind of interaction where we can talk openly and discuss AI as users, as builders. So definitely feel free, guys, to, if you don't want to talk, to write a message in the chat. There's also a Q&A section. You're also very welcome to use the raise the hand feature, or if you find a good and natural point just to interject with a reply, also do that. Don't feel like you necessarily have to put your hand up, but do so and we'll definitely come back around to you. There's no formal agenda at all, just simply a case of opening it up for discussion and letting it flow in that direction. What I'll do, as I still see more people coming in, I will go through an initial introduction slide just so that everybody who is watching the recording can also get a sense of what it is that we're trying to do here today. And I promise it won't be any trying to sell you anything or a pitch. It's purely just to try and invigorate the discussion and see where everyone's thoughts are. I know some people that wanted to join today were concerned that it was going to be too technical because they're not from a technical background. And it can go in that direction if that's where the majority of the chat would like to go to. But I also want it to be for business individuals who are leaders in their department, in their company, and are concerned with how AI may or may not be applicable to them, and if they've got any questions. So I think that's also important. And then also the market, to talk about the market is crucial because we're in such a flux point at the moment. I think in 10 years' time, when we look back on all of this, it's going to be, how funny did we, was it that we had arguments over AI assistants and chatbots and what's an agent and, context windows and large language models. They may and should be probably very much in the past by that point. So it will be very, very interesting. We as Eclipse decided it would be a good idea for all of us to get together. I think the biggest issue that we're facing today, certainly for those of us in enterprise as users of technology and also service providers like ourselves who are trying to help people use that technology is AI literacy. And it goes for any tech that has ever come before. I remember when cloud computing became a thing and AWS had gone into the cloud, and there was definitely so much chat about the issues that would bring, and the way that we work today as humans was being challenged, right? And so essentially that meant that there was a lot of kickback on cloud computing, but now it's ubiquitous, right? On-premise is definitely second best to cloud computing, and the same will go for AI, and it's going through all of that at the moment, right? It's being challenged, but I think a lot of those challenges can often be outside of being literate around AI, and that's so hard to do given the pace, quite literally the breakneck pace that we're seeing AI literacy. The pace of AI developing and the advancements to keep up on literacy, even for myself who's been immersed in it for so long, it's a challenge, right? And the what and the how of artificial intelligence, for us as a business, it's and again, this isn't a pitch, this is a sort of an holistic look of how this needs to play out, is that adoption is key for business, enablement is key, and the realization of that. And that goes for any tech. So it doesn't just work for artificial intelligence, but for those of us in the community, the tech community, who've provided this as a service or use it in our businesses, we understand that there's a level of adoption, enablement, and realize. So it's not a profound or new thing. We do need to go back to the basics though, especially with the advent of such a new technology. So just to try and invigorate the discussion here, that we can talk about, there's definitely this significant shift that's happening in in just the AI bit. Never mind the fact that AI and the advent of generative AI has created this massive attention for a technology that's existed a long time. But in the last 12 months, I think about where we were exactly at this point in March last year. We're in a very different place. And March last year, we were talking about co-pilots, and there were lots of enterprises talking about how they've got AI assistants that are helping them summarize pieces of work in their workflow of the business, whether it's at an IT service desk summarizing incidents, or a marketing firm summarizing their leads and their competitive market analysis. That was yesterday's AI, and tomorrow's AI is about what's being pushed at the frontier at the moment. And we've all heard the AI agent name being thrown around. But to just get away from the hype, get away from the underrated nature of some of it all, is where the actual value is. And there's no need to argue about definitions about what it all is. It's just about outcomes at the end of the day. And what we need to be doing as a community of tech users and tech builders, from my opinion at the very least, is to look at how we can use it to make our lives easier, to do the tasks that are time consuming but are valuable and often costly. So making AI our autonomous partner so that we can free our time up and elevate our own work. And that also leans in to the discussions about, is it going to replace me? Because knowledge work is definitely at risk, but I think it's the knowledge work that's at risk, if you can call it that, at being captured by AI, but not the knowledge worker. I think I have a very different take on that, and sort of the enablement of AI agents coming in to help our work in our daily lives. And then up at adaptive workflow management and exponential multiplication of human capability. I've spoken about that loosely, but on the adaptive workflow management piece, I only recently had a discussion with somebody who said, when do I use an AI enhanced workflow and when do I use an AI agent? And I think that's really cool, because we need to use traditional system design technology when appropriate. And probably a lot more than those of us who think, oh, I'm going to get an AI agent to do that. I think it's so crucial that we still use our traditional technologies to solve our problems. And where a workflow that's prescriptive can do the job for us, we should let it do the job for us, because you will save a lot of money in just tokens that go to the LLM. If you can do the same outcome just as fast and just as accurate with the quality by avoiding using an LLM at all, and maybe only use the LLM to summarize the thing at the end. So it's crucial that we don't just use AI agents for everything. We still need to rely on traditional system design and system engineering. And as somebody who is looking to get help from a service provider, you definitely need to hold that service provider to an account in that respect. Is not to be using AI for the sake of it in an agentic way, but to still use the traditional system design alongside with it. But what that ends up doing, what you create there is, I believe AI agents need to be used to elevate me as an individual to do more finesse and creative work. And so when you're looking at an AI agent to replace that work that I do, that should be that principle. The principle for an AI agent versus traditional system design, for example, an AI enhanced workflow, AI agents should be able to leverage those tools. And that's part of the definition of an AI agent at the end of the day, is that they can use the same tools that we use: scripts, workflows, website, cPanel controls, you name it. The point being that we also need to alleviate the AI agents from work that they shouldn't have to do autonomously by constantly juggling with the objectives you give it and contacting a large language model to be able to do that work. Now, I might be saying a lot of things that many of you have no clue or understand what a large language model is. What's the difference between an AI enhanced workflow, and why does that matter to me? And to be honest with you, it doesn't matter to a lot of us. A lot of us just need to understand the outcome and what it could do for us in providing actual value. So I'd also like to hear from you guys about, those sort of questions that you have. You don't need to understand the difference between an AI agent and an AI assistant, for example. You just need to understand, in my problem, in my world, how can this solve my problem, Chris? What's the value that I'm going to get out of it? And you've got to hold the whole thing, the agent and the person that's building for you to an account on that issue. Some of the key challenges I think I'd like to discuss today is data and the human. Data needs to be clean, and the human needs to be willing to come and use the machine. That's the simple fact of the matter. And those are all crucial aspects of making AI work for us and AI agents specifically. And then just insights for enterprise, that you may be wanting to make decisions on using AI because you're under pressure, because your competitors are using it, because
Chris, sorry, there's a question which I think, can we go back to the previous slide? Just because
absolutely.
Some there. It's about data cleansing. So a question from Mers is saying, how can you expand on data being clean? That's on the, I think that was on the.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, what does that mean? Because it's just easily said, oh, data, clean data. What does that mean? Expand on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So with data, so the way AI and large language models work is that they need a lot of data. So large, it's not called large language model for nothing really. You probably heard things like if you automate something, if you put garbage in, you get garbage out. Now, if you think of on a scale of an AI or a large language model, if you put bad data in, it's multiplied exponentially. So if you get bad data in, you get really bad data out. Some practical examples of this. I went to a seminar last week on AI that was actually in service management, and one of them, interesting, was on AI recruitment within service management, very niche. And they gave an example, which is actually they had an illegal application or impact of using an AI where they automatically rejected candidates based on their gender or sexual orientation because the data wasn't good enough on their large language model. And now the robot basically says you're not qualified, whereas in fact what it meant was I don't have enough data on women, I don't have enough data on minorities, and I can't make a decision. Rather than make a decision of rejection in that one specific instance, it should have said, gone back to the human and said, actually, I can't process this because I don't have enough data. So that's just one example. So it could be that data's lacking, or is inaccurate, but also timely. So legislation, for example, changes all the time. We got the DORA compliance, CSRD is coming up again. That's changed from the very the original proposal that they had. So, for example, if you're using a model which would have the original CSRD implementation within that model, but now because it will change by the time it goes live in the legislation, you're now acting on inaccurate data, and it will have legal implications as well. So there's a lot of, and if you think about a knowledge base, for example, if you don't have anyone updating that knowledge base, you don't actually get users won't get the help they need, basically, and then they get frustrated, and then they go back to calling their service desk. A very simple example again. Chris or Ryan, have you got other ideas?
Yeah, I think also something worth mentioning is that a lot of people see putting AI agents or AI assistants into existing infrastructure with bad data as a magic bullet. It's not the euphoria to solve all your problems magically. You've still got to have data cleanup, data sanitization, a good data model, a good knowledge base. You can't just put AI in there and have it clean it up for you. It's not that good yet. So
I have tried, by the way.
Can I just add something?
Yeah, Ahmed, go for it.
Can I just add something as well? Because I think it's quite interesting. So when we're talking about the data within the LLMs, we're not actually discussing training LLMs, right? We're discussing how can we input data and cleanse data for the LLMs to be able to respond to, right?
Yes.
So exactly. I don't know if this is a good segue into how that works together, right? Because we've got different types of architecture on how you can work to utilize those LLMs. At the end of the day, we've only got a handful of foundation models, but that's not really where the business is. All of these AI tools that we see out in the market are ultimately feeding into the same foundational models. It's just the technology around those foundation models and how we allow them to read our data that makes the difference.
Absolutely. It's so true. And there are ways to obviously fine tune a large language model on your data, right? And create a version of a foundational model with your specific data inside it. But that's neither scalable nor advisable because of the extent to which you would have to do that as data changes, which is another important issue with data. Is it's not just about having that data presentable so that a AI based on a large language model can then ingest and deal with that data, right? So that's also a crucial point of not just having it in a structured way to access, but having it refreshed and updated. A good example of this that I've seen is setting up an AI agent that can help a consultant in their line of work. And depending on what their line of work is, what they might be doing, there are guides, there's documentation out there. If they're a software consultant, there are versions of different parts of the technology space that they are working on. Now, if that AI agent is only informed by an older version, you're often going to get into a bit of a situation there, right? Because you may be asking the AI agent a question on how do I set up this particular environment, and you're working in the wrong version according to the AI agent. And so what we need there is data for the AI agent to have access to, and it needs to have access to all of the versions of what you do as a individual and be able to act on those. There was a use case that I came across with somebody in the HR world where they've got an international company with their employees over different sectors, and they're also, because they're globally based, the different regions have different policies for holiday. And some of the work that they've done with AI agents and certainly with AI assistants was a big struggle because the data that they were looking at wasn't cleaned in the sense that it was labeled for different regions. Sometimes it was accurately bringing back questions like, can I approve this individual's leave? It would say, no, you can't because, it's Black Friday in that state of the US, and all hands on deck, basically, that there's a policy approval for that. But it turns out this person lives in Vietnam and works in a warehouse for the company there. It just needs to be, and it's obviously a lot more than that. You can't just put it on the data, but those are the problems that you have if your data isn't in a clean enough state when trying to not just use AI agents to leverage that data, but any tech, whether it's your existing technology before AI.
I actually think the human side, which you have on the slide here, is really interesting about the really low adoption rates, because if you make a really large investment, you want people to adopt. Another conference I went to, another talk, I think they said there was a statistic where they said it was a very large percentage, I think around 30 as well, of knowledge workers don't actually know how to find the data they're looking for. But now that's a huge, that's a massive constraint in doing their work. And so again, when you train that data and when you build the AI model and train it, now will you give them the right access? And especially if it's HR data, as you pointed out, it may not be something that can be shared. I know companies where they don't necessarily want to share their holiday quota. If you're in the US, they don't want them to see the holiday that you get in other countries because it's not the same number. And so obviously all of that will be something that you have to consider. So depending on the person who interacts with that AI, with the AI agent, how do you define what they can see? But also make it easier, because if at the moment it's so difficult to find the data you're looking for, then how do you make that a lot smoother? How do you make it a lot easier? Because that's how you get the adoption rate high. And the way to keep them high, obviously, is keep training that data, keep making it more user friendly, keep making it better to use overall.
Absolutely. There's so many issues with some of the use cases I've come across within the health sector. How do we manage the data in the health sector, which is precious data? I know the NHS are massively looking to that aspect, and I know that we may have one or two attendees from NHS who are interested in this particular area. But an AI agent, the idea behind it is to assist the human so that they can work faster and better, and that they can be more accurate. And so, that goes to the question of, will it replace me? There was a study done some time back with ChatGPT-4 where and I think maybe in the Microsoft research team who did this, but essentially they gave an AI agent, not an AI agent, they gave an AI assistant with a fine-tuned model, and they did the fine-tuning through something called RAG. So the large language model was just ChatGPT-4, which was before 4.0, and they had 100 GPs or general practitioners for each group, of which there were 3. The first group was GPs just diagnosing the same cases that all the other groups would have to diagnose without any AI assistance. The second group were an observational team that were watching an individual using the chatbot who wasn't medically trained but understood medical terminology, so I don't know, like a tech or something, to do the diagnosis through the chatbot themselves. So essentially, being an AI agent, they were trying to create an AI agent, but that hadn't quite existed yet, an essential GP AI agent. And then the last group was the GPs were given the chatbot to type to or to talk to, apparently. And what came out of that was very interesting and obviously created the question, is this going to replace me now? And that's because the group that had the AI chatbot were less effective at diagnosing the patient cases, and they all had the same cases, than the other 2 groups. And the group that was most accurate at diagnosing and triaging these cases was the group where the GPs were only the observers of what the person behind the AI chatbot was doing, essentially leaving everything to the AI chatbot to diagnose and to ask questions and to get to the bottom of it. So, that brings up an important paradigm about, how does that work? Are we suggesting that we all, especially in the UK, where seeing a GP is often very challenging to do, are we suggesting that maybe the NHS have AI agents who are diagnosing us initially, and the levels of trust and the levels of, the data privacy issue is a massive one there. But equally, how does it affect the human at the end of the day? How do GPs see that? Do they see this as a benefit or a help? Was the matter of the GPs who had access to an AI assistant just a simple case of they need more literacy? And I would argue probably yes, ChatGPT-4 required a lot of prompt engineering to get to the levels that we get to today. I think you can get away with a lot of poorer prompt engineering with the current models today than you could do with obviously ChatGPT-4. But that's another very interesting area of data and the human and AI, which is obviously worth talking about. Are there any questions around data and human from other people?
There's a comment. I think we could go to the next slide, but there's from David Coop, some areas to consider: context management, error handling, complexity of maintenance of prompts, which you mentioned there as well, privacy and security, scalability, and governance and compliance.
I'd be interested, Dave, if you wouldn't mind speaking to this, is from what context are you coming from? Because I know from the people that are on this call, there are just as many technical people as there are non-technical people, and they may be looking at things like error handling and context management and prompts as a bit confusing. So if you're willing, maybe you can share a bit more context around those considerations.
Well, it can do. It's really more for sort of people to think about those areas and perhaps take them away and to investigate on them. But I mean, I think the things about context management is that, as we know, once you start, shall we say, a conversation, it can actually, end up going down the rabbit hole if you're not actually careful. You lose the plot.
Mm-hmm.
Prompt maintenance, obviously, with every tool, you need to have some sort of structured maintenance in there, and these systems, from what we've seen, sorry, a bit of a throat. These systems, what we've actually seen, are sort of moving exponentially. Yeah, the actual size of data that are being held. Error handling was, I think, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? But then we move over to the scalability, which back to that size moving to on an exponential rate. And the complexity increases with that as well. So you get things like, there's obviously cost involvement there. And you could also end up with things like performance bottlenecks, and finally governance and compliance. I mean, there's a whole universe on its own, isn't it? At the moment, I think we're in the very early stages of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are all valid points, and it's something that service providers, especially consultants of the world, will have to grapple with as a matter of fundamental course in order to get to an effective AI experience for the customer. I would be interested to know, as a show of hands, and by that I mean, maybe find an emoji that shows a negative. How many of you in the call understand what a large language model is actually doing? I'd be interested to know how many of you. So if you do understand, don't post anything, but feel free if you don't think you quite understand, and don't worry about being shamed. I challenge technical engineers all the time on their understanding of large language models, and they don't know what they're talking about. So feel free to have no hubris here and let us know, because I'd like to then potentially talk about, what that is, right? What is a large language model? Because I think it provides so much context for you in demystifying what actually artificial intelligence is at the moment with Gen AI. So yeah, if you don't know what a large language model is, or you think you may not know, please give us a thumbs up in the chat emoji, and maybe we can
have quite a few thumbs up on the screen, so I think we're great. Yeah.
Cool. I feel like, just out of cheek, volunteering Ahmed to explain to us what large language model is, but no, I'll go for it. So essentially, large language models, and certainly what OpenAI did in the advent of stealing Google's idea. Basically, Google wrote a paper way back in 2000 and I think it was 16 about transformers, and it was off the back of their autocomplete logic in their search bar that we are all very accustomed to, and sometimes query as to how did they know I was going to ask that in the autocomplete. And that was the start of essentially what ChatGPT took on. And the important bit there is the transformer. The T in ChatGPT is the transformer bit, which is the technology they essentially didn't steal, but were inspired by the public white paper that, thank you for popping that up, Scott, cheers, addressing the transformer. And so what a large language model is its latent space. So think about the matrix, zeros and ones, and that green cascading scene that we often will see in the sets of movies. That's essentially latent space to a degree. I know it's zeros and ones, but what it's actually made up of is it's made up of matrices. And those of us who may remember our maths from high school, certainly at A-level maths, matrices are essentially mathematical coordinates. In simple terms, I know my applied mathematics professor at university would be curling his toes at that simple definition, but that's essentially what it is. And so the idea was to store language in a data store in such a way that it can be related to each other. So we can then start speaking to that data set and getting answers back from it. So essentially what they started doing is they encoded all of language into matrices inside a data store, which ended up becoming a large language model. And so essentially what that means is for every word in the English language, and goes for any language, it would be decoded into a matrices and a complicated GPS coordinates of where it was stored inside of that large language model in context with the other word that it may be related to. So the example I like to give is apples and oranges. Now, when you take the word apple and orange and you put it through an encoder to put it into a large language model, and how it works is it'll translate orange into a matrices, a GPS coordinate into maths basically, and do the same for apple. And there will be a relationship, mathematical measurement of how closely related they are. And so because they're fruits, they're pretty closely related, right? And so they sit in the latent space like that. And so when I type on my chatbot, what are healthy fruits to eat, it can then go to orange and apple, and it can then find grape, and because they're all pretty closely related to each other. But the interesting thing, and this is where sometimes the concept of hallucinations comes into play, is that when you record the word iPhone inside a large language model, it has a very, very close relationship with the fruit apple, or the word apple. And here's the important point, is that fruit is also a word inside latent space, which is closely related to apple, but it's nowhere near close to iPhone. But iPhone is sitting very close in latent space to apple. So you can see that if the large language model doesn't know what it's doing when you're speaking to it, it could tell you that an iPhone is a fruit. But why would it when it's not that closely related to the encoding of fruit, because it isn't a fruit. But because of its relationship to apple, he will have a small relationship to fruit as a word. So how does the response come back from the latent space? Well, when I ask a question, what are the best fruits to eat at this time of year? It's essentially going in there to find, first it encodes your question, and then uses all of the matrices for all the words that you use and plots them inside the latent space of all the words in our language, and then sees where they are the closest territory. And so whilst it's in that territory, it can then start figuring out what is the most likely next word that I need to respond with, and that could be a preposition or something like that. But then it's eventually going through the nouns and the verbs of what it needs to make a coherent sentence back to you. But it's only doing this through maths and through relationship of those words. And so the sentence you get back isn't something that it contextually understood, because the large language model doesn't understand the difference between iPhone and an orange and an apple and an orange. It has no idea what that is. But based on mathematics, it's able to determine this. So when it's replying back to you, it's just using the most predictable next word, given a whole bunch of parameters, one of which is the question that you asked, but also something called temperature, which we can discuss in another session at some other point. So you can see there that everything that we say into a large language model, or a chatbot that's AI, gets decoded into, gets encoded into maths, put into latent space, it gets dealt with, and then it comes back out and gets decoded back into English. And so when the first ChatGPTs came out, it was painful. And I remember playing with ChatGPT 3 and finding it incredibly painful to use, because it was hallucinating a lot. It was coming back with either very deterministic responses or just simple nonsense. And so we've come a long way in rectifying those situations. And that's largely down to the OpenAIs of this world, the Anthropics of this world, which are probably two of the largest privately owned laboratories in the world in terms of large language models. But now knowing that, you can understand that when we are trying to use AI and large language model to diagnose a patient's symptoms and getting a more accurate, in general diagnosis at a GP level than an actual GP, you can understand that the only way it's doing that is not out of context, but how much that data relates to one another. So to go back to the point that Ahmed had made, yes, when we're talking about data cleanliness, we're talking about the data that sits outside of the large language model needs to be clean. The responsibility of keeping the large language model data clean is the training that OpenAI, for example, spends in training ChatGPT 4.0 and 4.5 and 0.1. And we need to keep our data sets clean out here, like diagnostic criteria in the case of the doctor example. Scott, you said, I think this is why there's so much talk around probabilistic and deterministic. Absolutely. The probabilistic and deterministic is actually, in the large language model, controlled by something called temperature. And different large language models use different scale. Some use 0 to 1, 1 being the most sort of loosely opposite of deterministic, and 0 being the most deterministic. And what that does is it constrains, if you can imagine throwing your question into the large language model, the matrices being plotted, the territory being created where the data is likely to rest. And then temperature is a case of widening it a little bit so that it can be a bit more creative perhaps and find other words that are likely to be a good response or part of a good response, or being more deterministic, and that sort of constrains it. Again, I'm oversimplifying it, so if there are any machine learning and data scientists in here, I understand we can have lots of discussions about transform layers and that sort of thing, certainly at a different point. But I think that now gives you the context of why it's so important to have things like clean data, so that when our data does go into the large language model, say we attach a PDF with our HR policy for our company, that creates part of the territory that the large language model decides to operate in to answer your query or your request or your task. So this was some of the ideas from a business perspective. There's a lot of those enterprises and businesses that are going through great effort to try and make inroads into using AI, and specifically AI agents. They're coming to that decision point of, do I buy something off the shelf or do I build it in-house? And this was certainly a problem for, at the Prometheus of software as a service, where there were lots of different potential products you could use off the shelf. Salesforce was obviously one of the first to go up, but you had so many other options that you could use to take off the shelf and use, and then other people would just build something in-house, maybe a bit more archaic in an Excel spreadsheet, but they needed to fill a need in the business, so they created something in-house and built it. And now we've come to a point with software as a service to use that, and a lot of you in here are ServiceNow people. Understand that when you look at the Magic Quadrant, ServiceNow is a reference point for the best in breed and the most in terms of governance and best practice. So it's quite easy to hold on to a framework that is already embedded well into a tool, and most people gravitate towards that tool because they want that level of value back. We don't have that with AI. We don't have a single North Star to look at and say that's the example we need to follow. And so that's why we've got this whole flux at the moment of build versus buy, and it's quite important to get that right, to understand, buying this product off the shelf, is it going to satisfy my needs? And the problem that you'll often put yourself in buying stuff off the shelf, and there are a lot of products out there. Startups went very quickly when they realized the money at the end of this, and the potential for them. They built these products that you can get off the shelf to try and solve some of your AI agent needs or wants. And the problem is that we've spoken about the acceleration, is that a lot of that could be obsolete very quickly, because you might be paying quite a bit of a license fee for that off-the-shelf product, and then ChatGPT comes out with a new model that costs you $20 a month as opposed to the expense of the off-the-shelf product, and you've now got this risk of cost against a much more efficient way of doing. So build versus buy, that's definitely a topic worth discussing. Human in the loop, we've spoken about the human already, but this is more about, to what degree do we give AI agents autonomy, given how large language models work? How safe do we feel about letting them have the decisioning power to change how the workflow would normally work if we created a deterministic workflow? And that's definitely something that is crucial for businesses to get right. Human in the loop needs to be there to add value, to create trust and cultural acceptance, obviously, but also to quality assure what's going on. And in that process, we will, as we mature and advance as a species with AI, we will inevitably get to the point where it becomes commonplace. Human in the loop would be less of a thing. It's a journey, right? It's not going to happen straight away. But we're at that crucial inflection point where the human in the loop needs to be pretty consistent, but not at the expense of the reason why we're bringing the AI agent in, is to relieve the human of doing work, not create more work for it, relieve it so that there's a higher plane of application for the human, creativity and finesse, as I mentioned previously. But the other piece is vertical AI solutions.
Oh, there's Chris, there's a hand up.
Yes, go for it.
About the human in the loop, I think I like it, but it just, like, again, you were saying, does it mean that one has to keep intervening? Because you're saying inflection point. Can you just expand on that? Because you said it's a journey, and what are you saying, that eventually that the human in the loop will be eliminated? There won't be that handoff or that interjection. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I'm just saying, if you look at the past, like with the iPhone and how the iPhone advanced over time.
Yeah.
Initially, there were constraints built into the iPhone purposely, so that it wasn't doing things for you that you needed to do.
Right.
And so if you remember what the iPhone 3G looked like, or the 3GS, which was like the first wow phone I ever got, to where we are today, the level of advancement in terms of automation has I don't know, 100x'd. And so, but that was a journey over time. And there was the possibility in 2007, when they released the iPhone 3G, that you could unlock some of that technology even then. But purposely, because of that mistrust, but also being, quality assuring that technology, it was a journey for us to go, okay, now we can advance it here. And equally, it's the feedback loop. We can only advance in these areas if the human in the loop is there, and it's data. We're collecting data, and the next thing we know, we found a bit of white space to remove the human in the loop, because there's no point. It's become tedious work. The humans aren't actually adding any value, and they could be freed up. So I think that's the important thing about human in the loop, is that for the moment, it's going to be a lot more considerable than when we look at this 5 years backwards to this point. I think it's going to be very different.
Thank you.
Can I jump in on the build versus buy debate as well? I think
yes, go for it.
The point you made about buying into, say, a contract and then the technology moving away from you while you're locked into that contract. I think it definitely applies to buy, but I think it could probably also apply to build as well, because if you're building big models internally and building them all up from scratch, and then you've got other more advanced ways of building models, or you get more hardware to run bigger training sets on, you can still fall behind if you're building yourself as well, particularly if you don't have that expertise in-house. I think what you can do with buy, and I think what a lot of companies, including ServiceNow, are doing, is if the technology moves, then that technology can be not necessarily grandfathered in, but enhancing your initial contract. So, for example, AI agents are going to be available to anybody who buys Now Assist or ServiceNow. The dial has moved so much in a year that AI agents are coming out and just being added to Now Assist packages. So I think buying might be a way to do it, provided that your vendor is moving with the times quickly and adding those new capabilities.
Yeah, no, and I think ServiceNow, and just in that example, is a bit of an exception in terms of enterprise scale. They understand that better than anybody, right? I'm talking more about some of the frameworks that you can see online, often being posted on social media, advertised hard, trying to create white space. It's coming from startups mostly, and you're definitely going to pin yourself into a corner because they're not looking out for the strategic outlook. And this is the important point between build and buy. If you're going to endeavor into AI, you have to be sure of where AI is going to be in 6, 12, 18 months time. And so whatever you build today, you need to know that, or buy, it's going to be sustainable, it's going to be scalable, it's going to not go into obsolescence. So having people to advise you on such matters is important. People who understand the market and the trajectory of things. And to say that, like, I consider myself an expert in this area, but I also know that I don't know what's going to happen in 18 months time. But I have a better idea than most, and you need to make that calculated risk about, am I putting myself in a position where this tool's going to be obsolete very quickly or irrelevant because something else will come out that's cheaper, better, and faster, and I'll miss the boat in a way.
Chris,
yes,
one
hand up.
Yeah. And just that there's 7 minutes left, by the way, just there.
Cool.
I just really quickly wanted to just expand on the human in the loop piece. So I think anyone who's looking to implement AI in their organization, or is an organization that's helping other customers doing it, is worth thinking about seriously in a bit more detail, because it's going to be kind of one of the first decision points that you'll need to start thinking about as we talk about AI agents and pieces like that. And I think one of the most critical things is understanding, on a case-by-case basis, when to take the human out of the loop. And the example I always give is self-driving cars, right? The target for self-driving cars is no accidents, right? That's what we're aiming for, okay? But what if, and some companies are doing this, what if we're actually aiming just to reduce the amount of accidents that happened, right? You then get into this whole conversation about liability, right? With AI has managed, and self-driving cars have managed to reduce the amount of accidents, but they're still happening. But instead of a human being responsible for it, it's the AI responsible for that accident. And if you apply that to less jeopardy, so business decisions that happen in an organization, which kind of use cases are you more willing to take that risk on versus ones where you absolutely want to keep the human in the loop? And I predict that the human in the loop will exist forever, because there'll just be certain processes and things we do that will always want a human check and balance for. Whereas the stuff that you can take the human out of the loop for is where you're probably going to get the greatest value. So having a good idea of how you make those decisions on a case-by-case basis and being prepared for that's a good way to start.
I 100% agree, Scott. Thank you for that. It's so true. And I think human in the loop will always be there. When I say human in the loop will disappear over time, I mean for that particular use case, as we get more and more comfortable with the risk involved and we can relinquish it to that particular task. And I think that needs to be a strategy, right? As we advance with the technology, we need to constantly make ourselves and the AI agent redundant in what they're doing, because that will advance the technology, right? So when we get to a point where an AI agent shouldn't be doing the work, that it should just be a predefined workflow that has all the information now to be able to do that. It can then do it in a more deterministic and cheaper way than an AI agent would, or a human would, right? And then that way we start correcting human errors, agent errors, system errors a lot better, because it's a data feed, right? And it always goes back to the data. No matter how we paint this, people think it goes back to the money. I always say I think it goes back to the data. And we can always trace it all the way to the data. Cool, we've got 4 minutes still, so I don't need to go through all these slides. They were just talking points, really. Any questions from anybody? Any comments?
No, thank you. I think this has really been useful, the questions and the explanation. I'm just keen as a woman because a lot of my friends do not use AI, and I've turned on the memory. So the AI responds to me, and I call it buddy, and we just have a good chat. So he kind of knows me. So I keep worrying about the two aspects: people who are left behind because of knowledge, lack of knowledge, and people who are left behind because of lack of money. Some people want money and they don't have access to it. So I'm thinking of starting an organization that, campaigning to put that in the hands, especially for Africans as well. My brother, and also for people who've been financially abused as well, so that they can create agents and talk to each other, because
That's
they
so
probably
cool.
need a face and a champion as well. So those are just my thoughts. Anyway,
No, that's very cool. That's very cool.
I know,
Yeah.
Chris, you're just pretending that you don't know me.
Mercy. It feels like you've always been in my life, Mercy.
Oh, it's like he's a noisemaker in class, never does his homework, and they call him type officer. That's my job before he came into our group. So I'm mad at him. But thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Mercy. Thank you. Yes, hands up.
Hey guys, it's Jeff here.
Hi, Jeff.
From Monochrome, obviously we specialize in the sort of the user experience layer, and I'm kind of interested to see what people think about how that side of things is going to change, because I get this feeling that we could just have, of something voice activated or just one big search bar, rather than, when people are looking for information, from the Gen AI kind of things, and also kind of what it compares to what we have today. Like what do people want to achieve from these kind of user interfaces, and do we even need half the user interfaces anymore if agentic AI is going to go out and find everything for us? Do we need to have, it'd be interesting to see how it plays out. But this idea of, why would people need to have websites if agents can just talk to each other and get you the information you need through whatever device you're using? And this, I'm intrigued to see what people's thoughts are.
If I could answer that one as a comment, I think AI is freeing up a lot of our time for face-to-face conversation and those meaningful conversations. And so whether that's, I think everything that you see and consume should ideally be better quality, including things like user interfaces. So now if we can concentrate, our efforts on making whatever you see better, because the quantity doesn't need to be there. So we don't need to go and browse so many websites, or we don't need to go and look at so many documents, etc. But then the final documents and websites and not whether that's a knowledge base or something, that final product that we do see, then making that look really good and really impactful. I think there's definitely a need for that.
Yeah, I think as well. I think people still like to browse, don't they? They still like to have a look at themselves, and there'll be across a time where we probably have to learn how to trust that AI is going to pick the best things for us.
Yeah.
If you're booking that holiday to the south coast of England with a dog-friendly hotel or something like this, kind of what's it going to come back with? We don't know yet. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I think we're going to get to a point where let's use Amazon shopping, for example. I think we're going to get to a point that my experience with the user interface is going to be very different to yours, Jeff. You may like to browse and, flick through the reviews. You may want to, do the more traditional stuff. And I might not want to really see anything. I just want to know, what does the market think is the best product for this job or this task or whatever, and, just buy it, please. And so my interface ends up just looking like the Amazon, I don't know what their chatbot's called now. Rufus or something, can't remember. I'm just looking at Rufus the whole time, whereas you're still looking at the whole browser. And the reason I say it is because we've definitely seen and played with AI agents that change the interface of the same website for personalized views, which I think is quite an interesting user experience change, right?
Yeah, exactly. It'd be interesting to see how it plays out, and kind of what percentage of people are happy just accepting that they're going to get the right answer straight away, and how many people would like to. Is everything going to shift across so that people, maybe only 20% of people like browsing through things, so people's time and budget and efforts don't get spent on those as much, which is fair enough.
Yeah.
Or does it stay closer to 50%, 80%? I don't know. I think it all depends how much people trust the results, I guess, from AI, which I'm sure will get better over time.
Yeah, it will. And there's so much change going on, and the queries and questions like this, Jeff, that you have are part of that process of us advancing this, not for the sake of the tech, but to solve those problems, right? How do we get, in the Amazon example, how do we get more people interacting and buying on our website? And how do we appeal as an Amazon business to create that experience? Because that's the thing. We're using AI as a tool to solve problems. The problem isn't how do we use AI? The problem is, which is often the way people are thinking about it right now, the problem is I have a UX, UI problem, I have a customer experience problem. Can I use AI to solve it? And you're thinking in those terms of how can we solve the experience for the user and how are things going to change? And I think that's what creates this momentum for those changes to occur. And we need to have conversations like this all the time, because echo chambers are terrible places. But over here, yes, when I'm sitting behind my machine with ChatGPT, it loves to say, yes, Chris, that's a great idea. And then
I like to ask
take
criticism. That's my latest thing, because otherwise it just loves everything, even though it's really rubbish. But
and then I take mine to Claude after that as well, and say, okay, ChatGPT said this and it's criticized me. What do you think about what it said and its criticisms of me? You should do that.
I've actually done the same with a 4A as well, because you get lots of different, you put the same prompt to get some. Anyway, I'm sorry, it's 3 past, and I know we've had people drop, understandably, because people will have meetings on the hour. Chris, do you want to say some final words? Ryan?
If anybody would like to say some final words, that's fine. I can keep this ticking along for a little bit longer. If anyone has anything to say before we all drop off. I think it's been super useful to have this conversation, and I'm up to have it again where we can maybe have less of a slide deck and just everybody turn their cameras on and we talk about a particular topic. We can pick a topic that has come out in the day, or maybe we do a poll so that everybody can sort of suggest what the one topic is that we should start off from, but allow it to be a communal podcast where we can just talk through these things. The thing that Jeff brings up, I think, is a very cool one to wax lyrical on, and then maybe just talk about our experiences with using Chat GPT and Claude against each other to make us feel better about the stuff that we wrote. Yeah. Cool. Anything, Ryan, from you?
No, I think that was a good sum up. Thanks for organising.
Yeah, no worries. Scott, is he still about?
I think Scott had to drop.
Yeah, no drop.
Yeah, cool. A few of us.
Awesome. Okay, guys. Well, I'll send the recording out to those of you who may be interested in going back to it. I think it'd be more interesting for those who didn't get to join. I know that some of you sent questions before the meeting. I think we can reserve those for another AI at lunch. And if you think that having this meeting, this get together in the evening, even late evening, every now and then would work for you better, then do let us know. But yes, thank you. And appreciate all your feedback in the chat. If you have any other comments, email me. You've got my email address now. Any suggestions on what you'd like to talk about as well, that'd be good too. Thanks very much, guys.
Amazing. Thank you.
Cheerio. Bye.
Thank you for joining Eclipse AI for a brilliant discussion. And a special thanks to our panel speakers, Thule Bell, Ryan Deuce, Scott Gamble, and Chris Jones. We are grateful to those who joined the conversation and look forward to much more in the near future. Eclipse AI is a consulting firm focused on helping enterprise adopt, enable, and realize AI agents.